The other day, I was having a super interesting discussion with somebody about work and jobs, the jobs that are on the market, the prospect of new employment, and all these super interesting and potentially exciting things. But this person brought up a really interesting concept to me, something that I'd never thought of before, but the more I started to dwell on it, it's kind of true. Some people, perhaps even a lot of people, cannot afford to get a job. And that sounds weird. It sounds kind of ridiculous when you just say it out like that. But then, no, really think about it. This is what I did. The cost of working is something that we don't discuss enough in today's society. Whether you can afford it or whether it's just perhaps a drain on your income or your finances. This is an unaccounted for cost that no one ever really discusses. I think a good point that initially stood out to me was earlier this year when I got my job, right? I got my first job. I run my own businesses, so I didn't really need one, but I decided I'd get a job as well. And eventually I finally landed a job. As I say, I run my own business, so I have money, but it was like, make sure you wear this uniform. And the uniform is not a uniform per se, but it's a certain standard of dress, let's say. And it didn't take me long to realise at all that I had nothing of this nature in my wardrobe. It was a combination of outfit that I wouldn't really wear myself. It doesn't really matter, but I just thought, so I've got nothing. So I went down to my local shopping centre or mall, whatever you want to call it, and I went shopping, as you do. And then I realised, okay, so I have spent maybe like 100, 150, 200 pounds on the job before my first day. And I guess when I started to work it back, this is a case for a lot of people. Because a lot of people who are looking for new jobs are probably broke, nothing wrong with it, but it's probably true. And then you start to think, so they would probably run into an issue in this regard. Then you start to think about other costs associated with work. Because yeah, a lot of places don't pay uniform, and we're going to get back to that in a minute. But then we have things like travel costs. A lot of people who I even know have to pay to park, which to me sounds crazy, but it is what it is. And then we start to think about the real cost of working. Obviously most jobs, if not all jobs, will leave you net positive, but really though, let's say you live in a village 15 miles out of the city, which is not an unreasonable prospect, and you're trying to increase your chances. Well, if you've got poor transport links, then you're either at the mercy of unreliable public transport, here in the UK at least. The amount of times you go for a bus and it just doesn't come, especially in these rural towns, it's just hard to run these services. Then you've got trains which are extortionately priced, or driving a car. So you've got your car parking, your car fuel, your car maintenance, which, let's be honest, is at least, let's say, £2,000 a year to run a car, and that's probably an exceptional understatement. More like 3 to 5. But we'll say 2. Then you think about, like I say, your uniform, you think about potentially your parking, lunch at work, and then you start to think, okay, so this is these sort of hidden costs that we don't really speak about. And I just want to draw some attention to this for a lot of people, because I know that this actually is an issue. As I say, if you are essentially broke, you may have a brilliant job opportunity, but with it being, say, 10 miles away, which again is not that uncommon, for someone like me, fairly easy, right? I just jump in the car. If it needs filling up, it needs filling up, fair enough. And again, the job will sort of break even maybe after even the first day or two. But for a lot of guys, and people generally actually, the first challenge is going to be about getting to the work. So let's assume that it's an office job, let's say 10 miles away. Fuel cost, vehicle cost, maybe bus cost, train cost, whatever, transportation cost. That might be £10. I think that's quite reasonable. And that's, say, even if we're running a car, you might say, well, it's not £10 in fuel, but no, we'll account for vehicle wear and tear, we'll account for maintenance, and we'll say it's about £10 a day to travel, maybe 20. Depends if you get train, bus, or where you live, right? It's a very hard example to kind of pinpoint. Lunch, £5 to £10. Maybe if you eat homemade sandwiches, it might be like £3, but you're still paying for your lunch, which is fair in a way, but work uniform, well, if you work full time, what do you need? A different outfit every day, a different outfit for every other day, maybe you just alternate them out, or maybe 2 outfits if you're going really frugal. But that in today's world is probably going to be at least 30 to 50 pounds a piece, and that's very, very conservative. So now we're at a point where your upfront costs for even getting the job might be £100. Then we say this idea of just getting a job, just get a job. Well, I feel like a lot of the people who say that may look at it from the perspective that I previously looked at it, in the sense that, okay, what's the problem? But then you start to think about it. So a certain amount of people will be priced out of a certain type of work because they can't afford formal office shoes and a shirt and tie, or because they can't afford transportation costs. And a lot of these places, this is just the way that it is, right? You get paid perhaps a month after you've joined, or a couple of weeks after you've joined. And especially for a lot of people do not have the luxury of savings. I say you should always have at least 6 months of your savings, but at the same time, it's easy to say that if you've got low living costs. The reality for a lot of people is they can't save 6 months. They've got the car, they've got the kids, right? So they are basically living broke, potentially even in debt for the first month. So to leave their job and then move to the next one could be a challenge. To even get the job in the first place. And then if we account for the potential of people who may be on some sort of earning supports, like the benefits or whatever, it's probably a challenge for the first couple months, or the first month at least, because there are upfront costs of having a job that nobody ever speaks of. And this is, I would say, more important to discuss than we make out, because it proves that this idea of just get a job in all regards is not necessarily that easy. And that's not even taking into account jobs where training is required, jobs where a certain set of skills or licensing is required. And sometimes your employer will pay with you or for you, and sometimes they won't. And like I say, if you're in a fairly reasonable financial position, I'm sure you can leave a big comment under this saying, well, that's nonsense. I think, great. But I'm sure a lot of people can probably relate to this. And I don't think it's an issue that's highlighted as much as perhaps it should be. The amount of people who do not even have the savings to start the new job. I don't know, I just think that's an interesting position that we find ourselves in. And jobs that require relocation, well, then we're talking about even more costs. I'm sure there's costs that I missed out when I was talking about this, but you get the point, right? If there's more costs, it's more extreme. I just think this is something that we need to speak about more. It's something that not a lot of people realise. And of course we know that we have some costs which are going to be associated with our job, with our travel, some time-based costs, some actual financial-based costs. But no, really, for the people who are genuinely trying to break out of the cycle of relative extreme poverty, not actual extreme poverty, but relative to the place of their residence, maybe the UK, the US, and they're basically broke, well, they are broke, that is perhaps not as easy as we might think, and it might not be as easy as we fail to give sympathy for. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, give us a like and subscribe. I'll see you again.